Have you ever walked into a room and instantly calculated how much space you're allowed to take up? Not physically, emotionally. Like you instinctively lower your voice, soften your opinions, laugh at things that aren't funny, just to make sure you don't disturb the air too much. And maybe you don't even realize you're doing it. It's automatic, like muscle memory. Most people think confidence is something you either have or don't have. They assume shyness is personality, quietness is temperament, independence is strength. But sometimes what looks like personality is adaptation. Let me explain. Imagine a plant growing towards sunlight. That's natural. But now imagine a plant growing in a room where the curtains are always closed. It doesn't stop growing, it just bends, it twists, it adapts to whatever light it can find. Over time, that bent shape becomes its normal. Children are exactly like that. A child doesn't enter the world trying to be invisible. They enter loud, needy, expressive. They cry when they're uncomfortable. They laugh without restraint. They demand attention without apology. And then something subtle can happen. Not necessarily yelling, not necessarily abuse. Sometimes it's quieter than that. A parent distracted, a caregiver emotionally unavailable, feelings dismissed with "you're overreacting," big emotions met with silence. Nothing explosive, just nothing. And here's what's psychologically fascinating. Children don't interpret emotional absence as "my parent is overwhelmed." They interpret it as "I am too much." That interpretation changes everything, because the brain of a child is wired for survival through connection. If connection feels threatened, the nervous system adjusts. It starts scanning. What version of me keeps the room calm? What version of me gets less negative reaction? So the child experiments. Maybe they become the quiet one, maybe the helper, maybe the overachiever, maybe the funny one who keeps everyone comfortable. Whatever works, stays. And eventually, that adaptation feels like identity. There's a concept in developmental psychology called attunement. It refers to a caregiver's ability to notice, reflect, and respond to a child's emotional state. Not perfectly, not constantly, just consistently enough that the child feels seen. When attunement is missing, something subtle but profound happens. The child's internal world doesn't get mirrored back to them. And when your emotions aren't reflected, they become harder to understand. Imagine learning a language that no one ever responds to. Eventually, you stop speaking it. That's what emotional invisibility can feel like in adulthood. You struggle to identify what you feel. You default to "I'm fine." You downplay your needs. You feel uncomfortable when attention is directed at you for too long. And the strange part, from the outside, you might look incredibly composed, high-functioning, responsible, mature, because invisibility often breeds competence. When you can't rely on emotional support, you rely on yourself. You become independent early. You don't ask for help. You pride yourself on not being needy, and society rewards that. Teachers call you well-behaved. Bosses call you reliable. Friends call you low maintenance. But inside, there can be a quiet loneliness that's hard to name. It shows up in relationships. When someone genuinely wants to know how you feel, you freeze. When someone offers consistent affection, it feels unfamiliar, sometimes even suspicious. Compliments slide off you like water. Conflict terrifies you because disagreement meant disconnection. You don't sabotage closeness because you don't care. You sabotage it because your nervous system equates visibility with risk. Neuroscience actually supports this. The brain's threat detection system, particularly the amygdala, becomes highly sensitive in environments where connection feels unstable. Even subtle relational cues can activate old survival patterns. Your body reacts before your logic catches up. So when someone says, "just open up," it's not so simple. Opening up once meant exposure without protection. Here's the part I really want you to hear. The version of you that learned to shrink was intelligent. It wasn't weakness, it was strategy. If being quiet reduced tension, that was brilliance. If being helpful secured attention, that was resourcefulness. If disappearing kept things peaceful, That was survival. The problem isn't that you adapted. The problem is that your nervous system doesn't automatically update when your environment changes. You might not be in that childhood home anymore. You might be surrounded by people who genuinely care. But your body still remembers the old rules. Don't be too loud. Don't need too much. Don't take up space. And here's something both painful and hopeful. Those rules are learned, which means they can be unlearned. Slowly. Not through forcing yourself to be extroverted or dramatically expressive, but through micro moments of self-permission. Catching yourself minimizing your feelings and instead saying, "No, that actually bothered me." Letting someone sit with your emotion without rushing to fix their discomfort. Accepting a compliment without deflecting it. These moments feel small, but for someone who grew up invisible, they are revolutionary. And there's also grief involved, and this is the part people don't talk about enough. You may have to grieve the version of you that didn't get mirrored. The birthday where you felt unnoticed. The report card you wished someone celebrated more. The conversations that never happened. Grieving absence is strange. There's no dramatic memory to point at, just a pattern of quiet. But grief isn't about blaming, it's about acknowledging impact. And something powerful happens when you start acknowledging your own inner world. You begin to echo yourself. You notice you're tired instead of pushing through automatically. You admit you're hurt instead of laughing it off. You recognize you want connection instead of pretending you don't. That's how visibility begins, internally first. Over time, something shifts. The room doesn't feel as dangerous. You experiment with being a little louder, a little more honest. You test what happens when you don't shrink. And often, what happens is nothing catastrophic. Sometimes, what happens is closeness. Because the truth is, most healthy relationships don't require you to disappear. They require you to exist. If you've always felt like the quiet background character in your own life, maybe it wasn't personality. Maybe it was protection. And protection was necessary once, but you're allowed to reassess it now. You're allowed to take up emotional space. You're allowed to have needs. You're allowed to be seen without earning it first. That shift doesn't happen overnight. It happens in layers. But every time you choose not to shrink automatically, your nervous system learns something new. It learns that visibility doesn't equal danger anymore. If this felt uncomfortably familiar, that's not coincidence. Recognition is the first crack in invisibility. It means something inside you is paying attention. And maybe tonight, instead of scrolling past that feeling, you sit with it for a minute. Ask yourself gently, where did I learn to disappear? And do I still need to? If this resonated, tell me in the comments. Were you the quiet one, the helper, the overachiever, or something else entirely? I read those stories more than you think. And if you want more deep dives like this, not surface-level advice, but real psychological unpacking, consider subscribing. There's a lot more about the mind we haven't explored yet. Because the truth is, you were never meant to be invisible. You just learned how. And you can learn something different now.